Hey everybody, Amazing Libertarian here. Today I'm making a video to show why I think Jesus Christ was in fact God. Now, I'm not even going to go into the evidence supporting that Jesus even existed in the form of a man. I'll link in the description to sources for, why I think Jesus even existed. But I'm going to skip that and go into the arguments for why I think Jesus was God. My first argument is just logical argument, and two assumptions need to be made for the argument to work. So the first assumption is that God exists, and the second assumption is that God is a loving God. So let's make those two assumptions, and from those two assumptions, I draw the conclusion that C, God would, in fact, send himself to earth. Now the reason I draw that conclusion is because if God exists and he is loving, then he would want to show that he knows the evils and the suffering that can happen on earth. God wouldn't have to send himself to earth to know all of the evil and the suffering on the earth, but in order to prove that, in order to experience it firsthand, I believe that God would send himself to earth to experience that. Now, of course, that's not nearly enough proof to show why I think Jesus Christ was God, so I have some other sources to prove it. The first one is the empty tomb after Jesus was in fact crucified. And Jesus Christ being crucified can be found in extra biblical sources. It did in fact happen. But the empty tomb that was found after he was crucified. So to prove that there in fact was an empty tomb, there's three main reasons that I found through research. The Jerusalem factor, which was that Christianity sprung up in Jerusalem after Jesus being crucified. But there'd be no reason for that to happen if the tomb wasn't empty. If the tomb was still had Jesus' body in there, then all the Roman officials would have to do is show his body to the people in Jerusalem to prove that it was all just a hoax and that there was no, reason to believe in Christianity. So that's the first reason. And then the Jewish response to the Jesus Christ's crucifixion and then resurrection, when the believers and the disciples said that Jesus Christ was resurrected and said there was an empty tomb, instead of the Jews just saying, no, there's an occupied tomb, look, we have Jesus' body still, they accused Christians of stealing Jesus' body. So if they accused them of stealing the body, then that means the tomb was in fact empty. And then the third one is that the women were actually reportedly the first ones to find the empty tomb, which if this was all just fabricated and this was just some myth or made up story about Jesus being resurrected, then the men who wrote the story, they would want to say that men found the tomb first, because in those times it wasn't women weren't respected enough to have their testimonies seen as proof. So if this was all fabricated, they wouldn't use women as the first ones to find the tomb. They would use men as the first ones to find the tomb, because that would be more self-honoring, I guess. I don't know how to put it. But the men would want to be prideful about, they found the tomb first. But instead they reported that the woman found the tomb first. So if there was in fact an empty tomb, then that means that either Jesus' body was stolen from the tomb by Christians, or that Jesus was resurrected. And so if Jesus was in fact stolen from the tomb, then why was no Christian ever arrested for stealing the body? Why was there never any evidence of a Christian stealing the body of Jesus, or any other person stealing the body of Jesus? There was none reported that they had done so. With Roman soldiers guarding the tomb and things, no one could have been able to. So that leaves the only other option, that Jesus was resurrected. And if Jesus was resurrected, only God could resurrect themselves. So that means Jesus was in fact God. And then another point I found that I think can proves that Jesus was in fact God was that the disciples that died and were martyrs for Christianity, they were in the position to know whether or not Christianity was true. They knew Jesus as a man, and they had the ability to know if he was resurrected or not because they lived during that time period. So they knew personally if Jesus was God or if he wasn't because they experienced that. So if they knew that, then what reason, if they found that Jesus wasn't God, there'd be no reason for all of them to go and be martyrs, except for one. If there was one that was not a martyr. But all of the others, why would they go out and be martyrs for a cause they knew for a fact was not true? And if they knew for a fact that it was true, then it would make sense for them to go and be martyrs for it, because they were believing in the truth, and they weren't going to change their opinions. They were all in the position to know if Christianity was true or not, and if Jesus was God. So, yeah, maybe you can say one would be, stupid enough to go out and be a martyr for something he knew wasn't true. But if they all knew it wasn't true, they wouldn't all go out and be martyrs for the same cause. So that's basically my video to attempt to prove that Jesus was God. And I don't know how much of it actually made sense, but this was like my 10th try at making this video, so I'm just going to post it up anyway. See ya.